Such a Groveland cliffhanger, like. Okay.
What's going to happen with
What's
degradation
gonna happen?
for high quality water to be protected?
Oh, before you go,
All
I
right,
want
so
to
we are
ask,
back online.
I'm gonna ask,
Senator
if you,
McCormick, can we
rather
go
than
back
use-
online
rather,
first?
oh, I'm sorry.
So, good morning. It's Thursday, March 30th, 2023. This is the second half of the morning for the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We are looking at the topic of anti-degradation, and we have a committee bill in hand to help get that conversation started. Before the break, we had Mr. Overstreet and Mr. Groveland up. And with that, I'd like to return to them. Senator McCormick, do you have a question?
Yeah, just, we have two scholars shadowing this. I'd appreciate if you could use proper names rather than acronyms.
Yes.
Agency of Natural Resources rather than A&R. Thanks, because I've been writing my notes. I've been running out of places.
Absolutely.
And I
Certainly.
live from the district.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So just continuing, so I only have a little bit left, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mason to dig into some recommendations if you move forward with the proposal you heard about earlier. So two more kind of overview points. One is one of the issues that, well, I think the proposed anti-degradation rule is a big step forward, and it was a really good A&R process with stakeholders that has resulted in the core of the rule. There were a couple of things left out of the proposed rule, which are in comments we submitted that are relevant to legislation if you would move forward. One issue is, as you heard, like, what does the rule cover? And this is something that Senator McDonald raised. And as A&R testified, the proposed rule and the existing anti-degradation procedure does not address pollution from farming or silviculture or logging. There are also certain other Agency of Natural Resources permits that are not covered by the rule. For example, stream alteration permits are not covered by the rule. And so we do have concern that if we're not covering the full range of activities that could degrade these very high quality waters, our class A1 and B1 waters, we won't be protecting them. And so Mason will talk a little bit about suggestions for how to move forward on that issue. We understand, especially with regard to agricultural and silvicultural pollution, that these issues are difficult and have been controversial to move forward on these issues in terms of the effect of those activities on water quality. But as I said, they're really important issues, and there is obviously effect on water quality, and that we've seen from agricultural pollution in particular over the years. But our high quality waters, many of them, as was referenced, are going to be at higher elevations where a lot of silviculture activity occurs. So we believe it's necessary to look at that issue as part of any proposal of assuring protection for these waters moving forward. And the other sort of overarching issue that I just want to briefly address is, which is kind of the core of the proposal, and we certainly understand the testimony about the challenges that the limitation on wastewater in Class A waters poses. However, I just want to be clear, like from a legal standpoint, there's no prohibition, and Senator Watson references, there's not a prohibition against moving forward with classifications, and it's been more than 50 years, and we haven't, the agency on its own has never moved forward. There was a petition recently granted for several Class A waters in Ripton, but while it may be challenging, it's not a prohibition, and while we see a link between the anti-degradation rule and the limitation, they're not intrinsically linked in our view. We want to see the rule move forward. We understand the concerns about the limitation, but Class A waters should be designated based on the data that we have to designate those waters, and that's what the Clean Water Act says. You need to classify the waters consistent with the data that shows their water quality and the uses there and the level of the use. So I just think that's important context. And I think Senator McDonald's question about the Black Gum Swamp is relevant because we would want any bill that moved forward to lift the limitation to have assurance that we're going to move forward with classification. If a select board, it doesn't have to be a limitation on wastewater. It could be a select board coming in and say, we don't like the classification of Class A for some other reason, as they did with the wetland in the Black Gum Swamp. And while the wetland reclassification process is different than this reclassification process, the principle of having local boards, because of their desire, because of their concern about any impact, regulatory impact of classification, saying, no, we believe it should be a data-driven process. And Mason could talk about some ideas to move that forward. And the triennial review, A&R has done a much better job with the triennial review recently, and I'll take responsibility of the Water Resources Board when it controlled the water quality standards, didn't every 3 years always, or maybe never updated the water quality standards. But it's not a given that every 3 years, like there's a clockwork machine. A&R, I think, honestly referenced that the rulemaking process, there could be delays, but we need to make sure we stay on. Like, it's not a guarantee that we're always going to be like on this clockwork track at every 3 years. So I think we're going to be looking for some assurance that we're using the data that we're moving forward with, because it is a rulemaking,
Right.
and we're classifying these waters.
Something along the lines of performance.
Something. I think there's some sideboards.
Schedule, guarantee,
Yeah.
whatever.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mason to talk about more of the proposal that you've heard to lift the 1,000
Well,
gallons.
since
with
you're
that.
both lawyers, I'll ask you, isn't the Clean Water Act, most of our environmental laws has the ability to take government to court for non-performance?
Not really. I mean, Mason could talk about that. Not in Vermont. It's,
I would like to talk about that.
yeah.
So I'll try to do
Not
this.
get negative. but
Yeah.
No, yes.
I don't know what the legal background is there. All right.
It's a good topic. I guess I'll just start off by first, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this. This is a complex, esoteric topic. And for us, I think it's really important. As you've heard this morning, there are lots of moving parts with this bill, and they are interrelated. But I think for purposes of this conversation, from our perspective, it's really important to separate them out and then to put the puzzle pieces back together, and regarding our kind of position and recommendations for this legislation, I'd like to start with just a little bit of background. First is that the 1,000 gallon per day limitation. I think the context and history of that is really important. And you heard some of that this morning. That was, implemented and developed. Yes, it was later than Act 250, but it was in that same vein of basically preventing development and protecting, pristine waterways. And why that's important is, I think our position here is that anytime we're reforming, I should also add the asterisk, is that prohibition has proven to be very effective at what it was intentionally set out to do. Okay. And so if this committee and if the legislature wishes to move forward with lifting that 1,000 gallon per day ban, our position is that we should tread lightly, be careful, be really mindful, and ensure that we institute and input protective sideboards in its place. Okay. And I also want to acknowledge too, I only have 5 minutes. The agency did a great job providing an overview and also articulated that 1,000 gallon per day ban has been seen and served as kind of red tape to many things, which may be deemed de minimis. For example, a homeowner wastewater system in a Class A water, state park wastewater system, et cetera. And, and also they acknowledged that prohibition has, served as a chilling effect on reclassification. We are not arguing with the fact that it has, served as a chilling effect, but I think it's also important, again, to zoom out and to realize that that is an assumption. It's an observation. It's not to say we're debating it, but again, I think that we should be careful as we move forward and be really thoughtful with protective measures. The next thing I'll add is that, John mentioned this, we fully agree with the agency that the current reclassification process is clunky, it's slow, and it's in need of a thoughtful overhaul, right? As you heard from the agency, there are countless water bodies and waterways in, deserving certain protections for very, under very high quality waters that have not yet been classified. We share the same goal as far as reclassification goes, and that's one of our recommendations that we made. So I think with that, I'll just jump right in for timing. You know, our first recommendation in regards to this legislation is technical, so bear with me. We're happy to provide kind of follow-up kind of written comments on this. But in Title 10, Chapter 64, involving wastewater systems, there is a presumption and deference given to licensed certified engineers of these wastewater systems. And actually, the agency can kind of provide the history and context for why that was developed. One of our recommendations is basically to ensure that ANR actually to remove the presumption and the deference given to licensed certified engineers, and to allow ANR to individually review these wastewater systems that would normally receive kind of a stamp from an engineer in very high quality vulnerable waterways. For reasons I said earlier. Again, this is all about ensuring there are protected sideboards if this ban is in fact lifted. The next recommendation that we have, which again is fairly technical, is that in the spirit of what the ban set out to originally do, we're recommending that this legislation explicitly prohibit wastewater systems that indirectly discharge 6,500 gallons or more in very high quality waters. And again, I can go into more detail about that. And also, currently, I have not had a chance to review the draft legislation that Mr. O'Grady put together this morning, but I am assuming that, as John mentioned, the idea of basically requiring reclassification.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that point. So prohibiting indirect discharge 6,500 gallons or more in very high quality waters. So does that mean A1 waters, or does that mean high quality for its class waters?
Great question. So this would be very high quality waters. So it would be it would be Class A waters.
Okay. Right, because there's A2 is like a weird thing. Oh, right.
And
Okay.
B1.
It would be B1 and Class A waters. So A1,
Okay.
A2, B1, and very high. What we call very high quality waters.
Okay.
And remember, we have no B1 waters right now.
Oh,
There's
right.
Zero. But
That's
there would
right.
be some. There would be some.
Okay.
Hopefully.
We're also recommending that this legislation, during the agency's triennial review for the Vermont Water Quality Standards, we are recommending that there be language not just in the findings, but in law, requiring any waters that meet, that have supportive data warranting classification or reclassification to be reclassified or classified, as you heard from the agency. In addition, an elephant in the room, and I have a minute left, and there's not enough time to go into this.
Go a little long.
Okay,
Right?
okay, that's
Had extra time to keep going.
that would be
We will-
incredibly helpful.
We will come back.
An elephant in the room
As well.
with anti-degradation and the Clean Water Act in general is non-point source pollution. And when we think of that, we think of agricultural runoff, we think of pollution from logging operations, et cetera. And we've had many philosophical conversations, healthy philosophical conversations with the agency about this, and whether jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act and anti-degradation extends to non-point source pollution. Here, without debating that, it is a problem. These are really critical, vulnerable waterways. And arguably, this is one of the most important climate resiliency steps the state could take, is protecting and reclassifying certain waters, as you heard. And so what we are recommending is that the legislation require ANR to convene a non-point source stakeholder group to review anti-degradation as it relates to non-point source pollution, and specifically the AMPs, which are accepted management practices for logging and silviculture, and the required agricultural practices, the RAPs, for farming practices. And we're saying that, that stakeholder group should analyze whether the RAPs, the RAPs, and the AMPs are sufficient, and also whether they're impacting these vulnerable, very high quality waters. Lastly,
And you have, this was not on our website, but are you gonna give this? to
yes, I
us?
will.
Okay.
I will submit this and I'll submit it in email. And we also can submit suggested comments. The Title 10, Chapter 4, which I mentioned, was the engineering presumption deference. But the last point that I would mention is we're recommending that this legislation also require the agency to report back to this committee and House Energy and the Environment annually on the state of very high quality waters, the effectiveness of any changes that occur via any reclassification legislation that we're discussing today, the number of wastewater permits and permits at large issued in very high quality waters, progress on reclassification, as well as, whether any course corrections or rule corrections are necessary. So we see these recommendations as kind of a belts and suspenders approach. Again, zooming out, recognizing that the 1,000-gallon per day ban has been effective. It's what it's done. If the legislature wishes to move forward, we're recommending that these protective sideboards be put into place. Did I miss anything? That was pretty fast.
No, that was great. All of our recommendations.
Sarah?
And I think you've said this probably a couple of times now. I just want to make sure. So, and you have specific language to be added to this bill about these things?
Yes.
Yeah, we just hadn't really seen a bill,
Gotcha.
We've been working on these issues, the principles are, if we're gonna lift this, you'd have to, the belts and suspenders around wastewater, that's Title 10, Chapter 64, how that would work. And then these other concepts could easily be put in the bill, but we don't know exactly what the full proposal, at least from Senator Bray, I assume, asked Attorney O'Grady to work something up.
Yes, well, so this was the drafting request we started with, was that conversation starter.
Mhm.
The one point I would add, if I may, is that I have not reviewed the draft that Mr. O'Grady, posted this early this morning. But if I'm correct, and I suspect it's the draft, many of the things that we discussed, some of them are in the findings of that bill, and they should be in law, not just in the findings.
Okay.
And so that would be one suggestion. So again, galvanizing and formalizing kind of a check on reclassification, because that's the goal. Again, like if we're thinking about the goal and what's the purpose of lifting the ban, that has to be formalized in law. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, in your memo, if you could specify where you believe these concerns would best be addressed. I'm guessing some land in rural, some land in statute.
Well, these are all recommendations for any statute.
Just for the statute.
Yeah, we have comments on the rule that go beyond this that we're working through the rulemaking process on, and these are, I think, as Mason said, belts and suspenders to accomplish. If the committee wants to move forward with this, just making sure it's meeting the goal, as Mason said, we're protecting waters still from wastewater pollution, and we're reclassifying waters.
Okay. On the rural side, are there any, quote unquote, deal breakers? Like, are you looking to see an next draft rule, and then you can comment? I don't want to ask you to are there things that you still believe are necessary, and you're waiting to see what the next rule looks like?
We want to see what we want to see the A&R's response to our comments.
Yeah.
And I think A&R has even offered to check in with the stakeholder group. So I think it would just be premature to say it at this point. And we're still working through it with A&R.
Don't want to spoil any balance of back and forth. I'm just going to point out on our days left, our countdown clock, the shot clock says 18. We might have an extra 4, could be 22. So whatever, it's intended to be a somewhat alarmingly low number, and it gets lower every day. So I'm just hoping that all parties will be timely so that, because we'll have to get to the house as well. We're gonna get further this year. So Senator Watson, then Senator McCormick.
Thank you. Because I know we're kind of running out of time, something that I would just love to chat about with you at some point later is, so you mentioned that this is an important climate policy, and I'm not sure that I understand why. I understand that it's important.
Yeah.
How it connects to climate doesn't, I don't know.
I think
But-
yeah, it's an excellent question that I would love. I mean, we can talk about it offline or.
What?
I give a short.
Or
short
email,
answer. I give
sure,
a short answer. I think the short answer is that part of the climate crisis is a biodiversity crisis, and that all of our resources are at risk as we see climate change and the biology change, and we see different rain patterns and different threats to our waters. And so I think protecting our highest quality waters and our best forest resources and our wetlands and our river corridors, it's all part of sort of adaptation to climate change and trying to make sure that we are really doubling down on our rigor and protecting resources that are not only at risk from development, but just climate change, and also climate migration and more development, more pressure on all of our resources. This is part of the S100 debate. It's been part of all the conversations we're having, right? Is that balance, right? And trying to adapt to what's happening in the world, in our state, and protecting resources, but accommodating more people coming here and so on and so forth.
And I think importantly, as it relates to John's point, is, as you heard from the agency that articulated this so well, there are so many waterways and water bodies that currently do not have protections. That's why, again, we share the same goal of reclassification fully. We just want to make sure that they're protective sideboards, But when we are thinking about the onslaught of climate change, increased development pressures, so many things coming to Vermont at a clip faster than we can actually imagine, we need to ensure that these, waterways have the adequate protections.
That they deserve based on the data that we know exists, but we haven't done. As I said, 2,500 feet, those are the Class A waters. That was done by statute. We really haven't done it. So we need to do it. And we all agree about that, right? We all agree we need to move forward. Anti-degradation proposed rule is a significant step forward, and that needs to be combined with the proper classification of these really high quality waters.
Okay, well, thank you for your, Senator McCormick, sorry.
All of this is directed towards protecting waters. We evaluate how good a job we're doing. Is that evaluation primarily about engineering, or is it actual testing of the water?
I actually think this question is best suited for the agency, but the short answer, Senator McCormick, is it's all of the above, right? So it's ensuring, like, part of Mr. LaPlame's job is reviewing that, these stormwater manuals for wastewater systems are robust and don't have harmful impacts to waterways, right? And so, like, it is that. And part of Bethany's job is ensuring that her scientific team is out there, as you heard, checking aquatic biota, macroinvertebrates, microinvertebrates, et cetera. And so it is all of the above.
Okay. Now, what I wanted to center on in particular, though, is that we do actually test the water at the final end result.
120 cents.
Yes.
Yeah, and that goes to the data. Yeah, and that's the data. It's data driven. Really, like, the agency's done a better and better job of monitoring and assessing, and this is about using the data and saying, oh, the data tells us this is a higher quality water, Class A or B1. Let's reflect that, so then it is managed that way and protected.
Okay, when someone is allowed to develop in the vicinity of high quality water because their engineering matches the requirements, we then months or years later check the water.
It gets
downstream.
Yeah.
But that's important. So this is the backstop. There are multiple backstop. There are multiple regulatory, checks, I would say, as Hannah articulated, but that is the importance of anti-degradation. And again, our position is ensuring that those sideboards are in place, so we don't look back and say, gosh, we made a significant mistake here,
usually quote Reagan, who's quoting some Russian proverb, but that's where trust but verify word. All right, so thank you so much.
Thank you for the time.
We'll look forward to your memo, and we'll be scheduling more time for this next week. Come back, have the agency back, look at the rule itself. It'll be helpful to have your feedback on the statute that fits on partners. With that, we are going to go to Mr. Coleman. So, Mr. Coleman, good to see you. Haven't seen you for a little while.
It's good to see you too,
Nice to have
Mr.
you.
Chair.
Nice to have you back in the room.
I'm glad to be here. Members of the committee, nice to see you. I'm going to be brief so I can yield most of my time to my colleague, Jeff Nelson. And obviously this is the start of conversation, seeing the draft for the first time this morning, and then hearing John and Mason's ideas for changes to the legislation. But just as background, I was a member of the stakeholder process and working group. Like John, I've got a long history of working on this issue. When I was at the Agency of Natural Resources as general counsel, this was something that was handed off to me. And the 2010 procedure that we've been working under for the past 13 years was in large part drafted by me. The agency did hold a very robust process. I think we were able to simplify that document and make some significant changes to it. So I overall just want to say the rule that's moving forward and soon will come to LCAR is something I strongly support. I do know that we're going to try and hold another stakeholder meeting to talk about potential changes as a result of comments that have been filed and potentially some of the issues that we've talked about today that are new. Stakeholders can also talk about during those meetings. The primary thing that you've heard today, and I think was characterized by several people correctly with the legislation that you're looking at, this draft, was really to move the reclassification process forward. And that's something that has always been challenging to do for a number of reasons: agency resources and time to do it, doing it through the rulemaking process, opposition to reclassification of waters, which is, I think, where this is focused. So to the extent that this change facilitates the reclassification of existing B2 waters up to higher classes, it's a good thing. I think everyone agrees that, I'm also an avid fly fisherman. So in addition to working with my current job is with the regulated community and coming at this stakeholder process from that angle and trying to understand what these changes mean. I also know that the agency has data. There are waters that need to be reclassified. And if this is going to help move that process forward, then I think that's something that makes a lot of sense. So we certainly support that. The other thing that John mentioned, and I think the most significant change, it's noted in one of the findings on page 2 of your draft. It's number 6. It talks about requiring a site-specific Tier 2 analysis for basically these A1, B1, or A2 waters, where there's data to support a higher classification. What that basically is doing, and it's something that I think the agency has done in practice in some instances, which is when you've got a project of a certain size and a certain scale in a very high quality water, sometimes the usual approaches to permitting, the usual best management practices are not going to be sufficient. And this basically gives the agency the discretion based on a project's location, size, and scale to say, let's take a harder look at this project. Let's use an individual permit so we can tailor the engineering, tailor the conditions appropriately, and make sure that in the end, everyone feels comfortable that this project is not going to have a degrading impact on water quality. And that's, to me, that is the primary change that we've made in the proposed rule. It's reiterated right here. And I think to John's point, we've operated under the assumption that all the permitting regimes do protect those high quality waters. I think this just puts an opportunity squarely in place and an expectation that we take a harder look when we're in one of these high quality waters. So I just wanted to flag that because I think that's really the crux of the main difference, and quite frankly, what the stakeholder group was able to come to consensus on, that is a significant change and will resulting in greater protection of the state's waters. I think that's more or less what I wanted to cover. I do think, since this is the start of the conversation, I certainly would want more time to think about Mason and John's recommendations to the sort of the belt and suspenders was the term that was the term that was used, and I think actually several of those are things that would be best addressed by A&R, since they will have primary responsibility for some of those changes. So with that, I'll stop. I'll take any questions if you have any for me, and turn my time over to Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. And for the record, Mr. Coleman, you're representing whom here today?
Well, I was asked to come, I think, as a member of the stakeholder group, and I'm not representing any particular client. I mean, I work with manufacturers, energy and utility companies, worked with the ski areas. So I've worked with a very, very wide range of members of the regulated community in my current role. And so I was a stakeholder for that, but also because of my long history with the anti-degradation procedure at the Agency of Natural Resources. For good or bad, there's a very small group of us that have been working on this for a very long time, and probably no more than the average person should. So that was, I think I was invited to come and bring that perspective of wearing the regulated community hat, and based on my experience and knowledge of the subject matter.
Sure. It seems like the A&R alumni family is pretty large.
Exactly.
Right. Well, good to see you, and
See you,
thanks
Joe.
for joining us. And you're reminding me, before we go to Mr. Nelson, if Mr. Grogan, you and Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Overstreet, there you are. If your suggestions that you're going to put in the memo, if you get them closer to legal language than just memo language, that'll accelerate the process as well. Okay, great. Mr. Nelson, good to see you again. Thanks for joining the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for everyone's benefit, my name is Jeff Nelson. I'm a principal with VHB, which is a regional engineering and environmental consulting firm with 3 offices in Vermont. I've been working as a professional water resources scientist in Vermont since the 1980s, and much of my work over that time has been with Vermont ski areas. I've testified many times before various legislative committees on water policy topics, and participated in many stakeholder processes, including obviously this one on anti-degradation over many years. So regarding anti-degradation, I've heard this morning what anti-deg is, and why it is important in effectively managing Vermont's waters. And I applaud the committee for diving into this, because as some have said, there are not that many people in Vermont who really actually understand what this policy is and why it is so important. I think one thing that I'd just like to highlight is for many years, and John Groveman and others have said this, many years, waters above 2,500 feet in elevation in Vermont have been classified as A1, the highest classification of waters that exist in the water quality standards. And as you can imagine, some of those streams and the watersheds of them include lands where many of Vermont's ski areas are located. And so as such, the ski areas have, for better or worse, been stewards of these watersheds. And there have been a number of discrete actions that have occurred over time to protect water quality in these high elevation A1 watersheds. Obviously, the prohibition on the 1,000 gallons per day wastewater systems, which will remain in effect. I mean, that's another point I think that's really important, is that this proposal that you're considering would only remove the 1,000 gallon per day limitation for future A1 waters. So all of the high elevation A1 waters would remain under that limitation because of the date that's included in the proposed bill. But in addition to that, ski areas have adopted enhanced stormwater protection, specific practices for the construction of ski trails and lifts in A1 watersheds, the development of water quality remediation plans to address past issues with water quality impacts, development of water stream riparian buffer management plans, and the completion of various master planning activities over time, largely through Act 250. So the on anti-DEG specifically, as Warren just noted and others have mentioned, the current interim procedure was adopted in 2010, and many of us were at the table at that time when that was developed. I think that the current proposal, the current rule, which the committee obviously will talk about further, is a huge step forward in protection for the reasons that others have spoken about. I also think that it provides an improved regulatory understanding and predictability, because it will, really specify which are the waters that are not presently characterized or classified as very high quality, and make sure that both the public, as well as anyone proposing any kind of development, is aware of what those waters are, why they are important, what the outstanding characteristics are of them, and make sure that any project that is proposed is properly cited, properly designed, properly reviewed, to make sure that the uses, the designated and existing uses of those waters are fully protected. So I hope that, I know Chair Bray was just speaking about the limited number of days that remain. And, I think the stakeholder group process was really outstanding in getting to consensus on many, many issues. But I do hope that, given your limited time remaining, there will be opportunity to advance this, because I think that it's really overdue that the interim procedure be replaced with something that really does a better job of protecting waters and making sure that the reclassification process does occur. So that's really what I wanted to cover. Certainly happy to answer any questions at this point, but I appreciate being asked to testify to the committee this morning.
Any committee questions for Mr. Nelson? All right. Well, thank you. It's great that in the ski areas have had to explore, live under the regimen of permitting for decades, and it would seem like your experience could inform work going forward, since you've already had to comply with the high quality water requirements.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point that I was trying to make, is that, many of these practices that have been sort of tried out, if you will, and perfected through, implementation at ski areas can now, as part of the agency's toolkit, if you will, be used, and I expect will be used if, well, I shouldn't say if, but when other waters become reclassified, so that, folks within those watersheds know what the expectations are in terms of how to ensure that those waters continue to be protected and continue to attain those higher classifications.
Great. All right. Senator McDowell.
So, when we talk about the ski areas and the good work that they have done, when we're trying to understand what a ski area is and where the ski area stops and the housing development next to the ski areas begins, what percentage of the state's land is ski areas?
I don't know the exact percentage, but I guess what I would say is that when you look at, say, the 2,500 foot elevation as the, the statutory change between B waters and A1 waters, that oftentimes what you will see is that, ski trails and lifts are above 2,500, but that if you think about base area facilities and residential development that may be adjacent to base areas, those are generally below 2,500 feet. In fact, I think universally below 2,500 feet. A lot of the base lodges are in the kind of 1,500 foot range. So those are located within, generally speaking, within Class B waters.
Madam Chair.
Do you have a follow-up?
Mr. Chair, I had another question that I wanted to ask, which was, could anyone provide us with a list of waters at the last 10 waters at the state to be upgraded since the bill passed in 1986 to protect upland waters? Do we have can we get a list of the last 10 upgrades of the waters in the state?
So that's probably an agency question.
Yes, thanks. And Mr. Lafond is saying, giving a yes nod behind you, so we'll watch for something from the agency.
And when they were upgraded.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Thanks again, Mr. Nelson. Good
Sure.
to see you.
Okay, take care.
With that, I'd like to go to, I'm not gonna, who knows if I'm gonna get this right or not. Apologies in advance if I don't. Is it Miss Susie?
Swazi. Thank you.
I
Swazi.
knew I was
Yes.
gonna have trouble there. Thank you. Good morning.
Well,
So you've been in
Good
this
morning.
lately, so can you introduce yourself? So and then
Sure.
we'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. My name is Pat Swazi. I'm the president of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. I'm going to read my testimony and then I'm going to add a couple of comments at the end that is not in the written part. The Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds is a volunteer coalition of lake associations and individuals. We're a statewide organization. From its inception in 1972 as an organization of lake associations in northern Vermont to its evolution into a statewide organization in 2001, the Federation has been dedicated to fostering environmental quality standards and preserving Vermont's lakes, ponds, watersheds, and aquatic ecosystems. Most of Vermont's 800 lakes and ponds remain some of the cleanest, most pristine lakes in the country. Yet climate change, the spread of aquatic invasive species, rising phosphorus levels, which can lead to dangerous cyanobacteria blooms, and increasing usage all pose threats to the state's public waters. To protect Vermont's high-quality waters, those lakes that exceed the Vermont water quality standards should be reclassified as A1 watersheds. And that's what we've been talking about all morning. A1 reclassification would better protect water quality, require earlier state interventions if phosphorus levels rise, and enable priority access to funding for restoration. The Department of Environmental Conservation has so far determined that at least 12 lakes, Caspian, Cole Pond in Jamaica, Coles Pond in Walden, Echo in Charleston, Maidstone, Newark, Rapunda, Rescue, Seymour, Shadow, South Pond in Eden, which is pictured behind me, and Stratton are eligible for reclassification. Together, these lakes represent over 50,000 acres of watershed that would be protected. However, all work to protect these very special lakes and their watersheds has stalled because of this antiquated prohibition on the discharge of septic waste into the watersheds of Class A waters as cited in Vermont Statute 10 VSA Section 1259D, which you're familiar with now. This statute is now functioning as a barrier to increasing protection for lakes through reclassification. 4 of the lakes, Maidstone, Caspian, Echo, and Shadow, have submitted petitions to be reclassified, but these petitions, while fully reviewed and deemed administratively complete, have been on hold for well over a year due to this prohibition. The goal of this statute, when it was passed, 1970s, 80s, was to protect surface waters in A1 watersheds by prohibiting septic systems that have a capacity of more than 1,000 gallons per day. And you've heard all the background on that already this morning. And that may have made sense then. However, today with newer innovative alternative systems, the focus solely on capacity no longer makes sense. Properly managed, these newer septic systems can dramatically reduce the strength of influent wastewater before it enters the leaching field. Such systems, which can manage larger capacities, can be scaled to fit most needs, are commercially available, and are a wise investment that will further protect these pristine waters. The current statute, however, does not allow such systems with larger capacities to be used in A1 watersheds, even when the discharge from these larger systems is cleaner than that from conventional 1,000-gallon systems. While it may seem counterintuitive, lifting the 1,000-gallon prohibition will actually provide more and greater protection to the state's highest quality waters. And here's some examples to try to put the picture out there. In 2022, and it was just completed this last fall, 7 property owners on the shores of Caspian Lake banded together to replace their individual failing septic systems with one shared system. This new system is situated farther from the lakeshore, some 300 feet, rather than the 25 to 30 feet of the old residential systems. By replacing outdated and failing systems, this new combined system better protects water quality and ensures that wastewater is not leaking into the lake. If Caspian had been reclassified to A1, and as I said, it is eligible to be reclassified under the current statute, such a system would not have been permitted, leaving the lake more vulnerable to degradation. And I'll just add, because of the expense of replacing many of these older systems, a lot of people are not doing it. And the fact that when they can band together, it's much less expensive, much more cost effective. And so they were able to do that and to reduce that problem up there. Innovative and alternative systems such as this one are a good model for other lake communities with aging and ineffective wastewater systems. Installing larger, modern community systems can be a more efficient and cost-effective solution for lake health, but currently would not be permitted in A1 water bodies. This statute and the related pause and reclassification have also served as a barrier for other lakes for reclassification to submit a petition. For example, Seymour, which is eligible for A1 status, has not moved forward with its reclassification petition, again, due to this 1,000-gallon limitation. Seymour's large watershed encompasses much of the town of Morgan and parts of the town of Holland. Currently, reclassification to A1 status with the septic limitation would prohibit some types of needed economic development within these towns, including such things as building a new school. By removing the 1,000-gallon limit and enacting the proposed anti-degradation rules, the Seymour watershed could be reclassified to A1, while better and cleaner, more modern septic systems would be used within that watershed. Maintaining this limit will not afford these high-quality lakes greater protection, nor will it reduce or control development in their watersheds. Rather, if there is no change, these lakes and their watersheds will be left more vulnerable to pollutants and to degradation. The much more stringent requirements for permit review and impact analysis contained in the proposed anti-degradation rules will do far more to protect A1 watersheds than an antiquated septic capacity limitation can do. Finally, the process to reclassify and protect our most pristine lakes has already been underway for nearly 2 years, and still these lakes and their watersheds remain underprotected. We urge you to not delay any longer, but to remove the 1,000-gallon per day prohibition and to enact the new anti-degradation rules to ensure necessary added protection for Vermont's most pristine public waters. I'll just add that, we're very concerned, this has been going on for years, and we're very concerned that we're seeing some rising phosphorus levels in some of these lakes. Reclassification to A1 status would require the state to step in if those phosphorus levels rise to 12 parts per billion, whereas where they are classified right now as B2 lakes, the state is not required to step in until it's at 18 parts per billion. So that's a big difference. And we'd really like to see once they're reclassified, we would see more action and more protection on these waters. I'll also add, because I've been listening all morning, water quality data is collected, the state staff collect that, DEC staff collects that. Many volunteers have been collecting as part of the lay monitoring program for over 40 years. So we have long history on many of these lakes. You can data and as of the watershed of any particular lake on the lake scorecard, which is on the DEC website, and fairly easy to find. So I wanted to mention that along with, if you go to the reclassification page, you'll also see information about this. And finally, I want to thank Mason Overstreet and John Groveman and some of the other speakers this morning. We are also in agreement that these waters need to be protected, and we're anxious to see it move fairly quickly, and we're very supportive of the work that's been going on. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has questions.
Great. Any questions for Ms. Swazi? And are you sending your testimony in writing to the committee?
I'm sorry.
Have you
I didn't hear
emailed your testimony to the committee?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
All right. We will post
have
it
to-
and make sure it gets distributed to committee members. Senator Watson.
Thank you. So you mentioned that some of these lakes that might be eligible for reclassification had submitted petitions for reclassification, but who actually is doing that petition? Where does that?
So the petitions are done, usually these petitions have been begun by the volunteer lake associations at those lakes in conjunction with the municipalities. So they have been working with their communities and municipalities to prepare the petitions and are being supported by both. And I think that has been the plan. That's been our discussion, that the plan would be that they would go forward with the municipalities. And that's actually why Seymour paused their work. The association at Lake Seymour began their work. And again, these have all begun 2 years ago, began their work first around the lake, gathering the data and understanding. And then in working through all the process and talking with the municipalities, with Morgan and Holland, discovering what this limitation would do should they be reclassified, they decided not to submit their petition. So they've put it on hold until this can get resolved. And if you look at the watershed, you can see, Morgan, I don't know if you know that area, but Morgan is pretty far off of the lake, but it's still part of the watershed and it would still be included. And we're seeing that in other areas that are holding back now because this is really a limitation. At the same time, we don't want it to be a free-for-all. That's why the anti-degradation rules are so important, and some of the things that Mason mentioned earlier, some of those tweaks that need to go in there. We're very much in agreement that all of those guardrails need to be there.
Sorry, thank you. Does that, this is a question for, I suppose, anybody. So is there a limitation on who can submit a petition to, or on a process? Okay, there's not a lot of limitations. So like a Friends of the Lake kind of group could submit a petition. The municipality could submit the petition independently. Could any individual initiate that process, or does it have to be a group?
It can be anyone. It's typically a group because the amount of data that's necessary to support the petition requires large groups of people working together.
Okay.
But there's no limitation on who can file a petition with the agency.
And a petition is the path that is designated to initiate that process, or does that, are there multiple?
The agency can undertake that process on its own as well.
Okay. So either on its own or by petition. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Overstreet.
Do you want to mention about the petition language in the rule? Because I think that's very relevant to her question.
The reference that Mason is referring to is that upon receipt of an administratively and technically complete petition, or upon the secretary determining on his or her own basis that we have the data, we would, the rule proposes to enact the protections that we're proposing for A1 waters immediately, and then move that forward into formal rulemaking, in the next triennial cycle. But the petitions, we do judge them, according to our so-called data standards, to ensure that the data correctly represents the condition in the lake or in the stream.
Okay.
All right, Sarah McDonald.
So the witness, for lack of a better term, has shared with us the development of a better mousetrap, a better system for treating wastewater sewage. Does the current law lack the opportunity for the rules to be written to recognize the better mousetrap and substitute for 1,000 gallons, a standard which recognizes that you can get a cleaner system?
The indirect permitting rules, the wastewater onsite rules allow for the installation and testing of so-called alternative systems. The better mousetrap.
So have they yet to be identified as being better or blessed by the legislature or some other authority and put into rule?
It's more a question that 1,000-gallon prohibition prohibits any system, be it a better mousetrap or an ordinary mousetrap in these watersheds. So that's the issue. The rules, the indirect rules allow for alternative systems. The issue, I think, that Ms. Swayze was representing was that the 1,000-gallon per day prohibition, if it had been enacted in the Caspian Lake example, would have prohibited any system greater than 1,000, including this better mousetrap, from going in.
So I'm just looking where in the bill it permits, encourages, authorizes, or directs the agency to list the criteria for the better mousetrap so that it can be approved.
The mousetrap rules are in the wastewater rules and the indirect rules, which are different rules. They're not.
But the bill.
I'm sorry, I may be missing your question. I'm sorry, Senator.
The bill language does refer to those two rules,
Right.
which include the ability for review of an alternative system that would provide better protection. So it states, yes, these systems are allowed, even if they discharge more than 1,000 gallons per day, but they're subject to the agency's rules under Chapter 64 and indirect. And then those rules contain these extensive technical standards, including, as Ms. Wazzy testified to, the review of potential alternative systems, including these community systems that provide substantially better protection than some of the individual wastewater systems at current camps and lakeshore properties.
So what has prevented the agency from seeking to promulgate those rules?
But those rules are in effect.
Oh, I'm missing something here. What's the whole one?
The issue is if Caspian was an A1, it was reclassified to A1, I believe that's where the problem is. Right now, that would not be permitted. What they did for the community septic would not be permitted.
A community system is often more than 1,000 gallons per day because it serves multiple
Bigger.
houses.
So in an A1 watershed, that would be prohibited.
The one at Caspian serves seven households. So it's much bigger than 1,000 gallons.
So the law needs to say we encourage the better mousetrap, the 1,000-gallon language notwithstanding.
Yes.
Does this proposed bill do that?
It allows for that. It removes the 1,000-gallon per day prohibition, which then clears the way for these alternative systems or more conventional systems of greater than 1,000 to be used in these watersheds.
But Mark's point is, but it doesn't then require anything further beyond that. It opens up the door, but it doesn't.
Right, then a permittee, a potential permittee or a group of permittees can come forward and apply for a permit using either a conventional mousetrap or a better mousetrap in these waters.
And your point is that there's a lot of technical things they would have to do to keep that anyway.
Correct.
Okay,
Right.
so does that feel like it answers your question?
Feels like it's a path forward.
Yeah.
If this bill starts with the elimination of the 1,000 gallons,
Yeah.
why would anybody bother to do the others?
Well, I think what they're saying is yeah, we can, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm starting to understand their point, but I respect what you're saying. It's very important.
Sure.
Just relevant to this, and so our point on this is that if this goes forward, we want a better, ensure an agency review of the mousetrap.
Yeah.
It doesn't give deference to the designer of the mousetrap.
That's what, okay.
Right, so that's,
And then, but you're saying that you don't need that.
Well, we're not saying that we don't need that. We're saying that our position is that the review and the technical standards are in the rule, and they, we review permits to ensure that they don't result in discharges already. Whether it's necessary for the agency to do the rule rather than a licensed engineer, I think we can have that discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
Makes sense.
concern for,
It's a chicken or egg game.
We're trying over here.
I've heard that not all designs are created equal. So, all right, so Senator Watts.
Thank you. Just coming back to this question about the petitions and the process, one of the recommendations that you had was, and I apologize if I didn't capture it fully, but something about requiring reclassification, like where applicable, right? And so how would that fit in with the existing process of initiating reclassification?
So what we are proposing is every 3 years, the agency, as you heard from the agency staff, they revise the Vermont water quality standards. They have to do that via rulemaking. And like Bethany was kind of joking, they just finished that process in fall. They're starting it again now because it's a long process.
Yeah.
What we're saying is every time they do that process, all of the waterways and water bodies, which have data warranting reclassification or classification in general, would be basically baked into the revision of the Vermont water quality standards. So it would happen triennially. It would be during the triennial review. And then, so that really gets at the point which Pat was articulating, is that then all of these waterways which are in need of protection would automatically get protection, right?
Yeah, and so you wouldn't necessarily even, well, I suppose you could still have the petition process, like to supplement that,
Right.
but it seems like that would drastically reduce the need for petitions if they're automatically baked in.
Right.
And so with that proposal would do, like, that language is not in here, but that's going to be a part of the language that you're going to suggest.
My understanding is right now it's in the findings of this draft.
Oh, that's right.
We're-
Yes, but it's
we're
not in the-
suggesting that it be baked into law.
Gotcha.
Because
Right, moves from the findings to the gears.
exactly.
Right.
And then there is an accountability measure. And then again, like what we think is important to dovetail is that report back to this committee and the House Energy and the Environment, so there's another check on it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Is the agency okay with that being law as opposed to?
Yeah.
Not proposing it, but it's certainly something that we would entertain.
You could live with it.
If I could quickly add, the other beautiful thing about the rule is, again, this petition, which Pete spoke about, like the moment a petition is lodged, that water body would receive automatic protection during the time the agency's reviewing. So again, it's another check, but it's automatic protection.
Mhm. And is that the current situation, or is that a new,
No.
okay, so it's not the
No,
current
so the
situation.
current
Okay.
situation, again, that's why, for me, at least in my simple mind, I have to compartmentalize and silo.
Yeah.
Like the current process, and it's by no offense to the agency, it's actually really not their fault, is that the current process is slow, it's clunky, it's kind of archaic, and
Yeah.
it's in need of this reform overhaul, right? So like, it's actually much more complicated. There's technical basin plans, and then there's petitions individually. So
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
I hope that this.
So, thank you, everyone. I'm having on our to-do list for following up next week that we're gonna hear from Messrs. Carpenter, Groveman, Overstreet on suggested language or just concerns memo, so we'll get that. Agencies providing a list of 10 most recently reclassified.
recently reclassified
Waters.
waters. And also, I believe you requested the list of candidate waters that we have that would meet A1 or B1.
Yeah, thank you. And then we'll schedule time to actually walk through the rule itself. So we've been alluding to it, but haven't looked at it and know that it's complementary to the statute.
Maybe we could, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
at some point, and maybe this is an off-session situation, but I really would love to understand this GIS tool. I don't know. I mean, it's very intense. And I tried to play around with it and I found that there are 3 culverts right next to my home that I didn't know existed. So, is there at any point when we've got a chance to, I mean, I can do this offline, but I think others might be interested in, I'm just putting an idea
I'd
out.
be interested.
Yeah.
it's part of doing this rule.
Well, so we get to see all of the waterways that they're talking about through the atlas that they've created online. However, I don't know how to actually do that. So,
We could bring such a person.
Yeah.
yes, such a person would be very helpful because I'm trying to understand how it will impact our district.
Should we get John Adams?
Yes, you said, does John do the work for you?
Not John specifically, but we have other folks that
Right.
would be happy to come in and walk through.
Build the layers and.
Yeah.
So we'll get a little
Okay.
electronic as well next week.
Beautiful.
That'd be so fun.
When-
She loves maps too,
No,
now, so
it's amazing.
it's really cool.
Yeah, well, and we can pop it up on the screen. and everyone will be able to see it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna draw the line somewhere.
Maybe you have a tutorial.
going to every house.
Yeah, hope we don't find any like tire burns in the yard. Okay, great. So thanks for that suggestion, Senator White.
You're welcome.
With that, I think we'll call it a morning, tomorrow at noon. But for folks who are following our other business,
are we not adjourned?
wanted to touch base on S-100, the housing bill, which is on the floor today for second reading, third reading tomorrow. We're inviting Senator Chittenden in to present
Oh,
his.
good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll seeing you again, probably soonish. We'll have Ms. Chakowski in to do our technical amendment, which is a 3-word amendment that's, that I had asked her to draft that corrected the way the language inserted, enhanced village centers didn't get the sunset language because they were in the same section with the other designated areas that pre-existed. So there's a new 3-word reference that ties them to that. So one
Corrects the
technical,
site. Corrects the site.
yes, just fills in a missing piece of, council found it, the quote unquote error over the weekend. Senator Chittenden has a proposal on S-100, so I've asked him to come in and present it to us so we can formally hear it, formally take a committee position prior to third reading where he's planning to offer it, I believe. And then we have other business starting at 9:30 relating H-126, which is Act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection, also known as the 30 by 30 law. Or Bill Act.